Hello, everyone. Good morning. We are going to start with slide number 15 on political cleavages. This is Mrs. McCarthy. We're going to pick up where Mrs. Carter left off. So, a couple important things to note for political cleavages. These are historic cleavages. Many of them have existed in this part of the world, in Nigeria, for hundreds of years. They were only exacerbated historically after the Berlin Conference of 1884, where the European nations had a meeting in Germany. They decided to divide up the territory in Africa. They didn't ask the African people if they wanted to be in colonies together with other groups. Many times, a lot of different ethnic groups were kind of chunked together, as was the case in Nigeria. So the major groups we're going to talk about today as far as cleavages are concerned: ethnic cleavages, religious cleavages, and regional or geographic cleavages. For ethnicity, there are any number from 250 to 400 different ethnic groups. The big three are the Hausa Fulani, the Igbo, and the Yoruba. These guys dominate life within Nigeria. They have little in common amongst each other and speak very different languages. The religion, Sunni Islam, dominates the north. It was brought there by the Ottoman Turks. And then we have Christianity in the south. It was established by missionaries. A lot of them were Portuguese missionaries and English missionaries, really starting in the 15th and 16th centuries. And then regionally, this is geographically influenced by both ethnic and religious tensions. Mostly it is north versus south. So urban versus rural is our next one. This one is potentially more based on social class. A lot of it, most political organizations, interest groups, and political protests take place in the cities. The wealthier people live in the cities, and so a lot of the urban versus rural differences are very similar to what we've talked about in other countries: Mexico, China, Russia. Social class: the elite's wealth is gained from the exploitation of Nigeria's natural resources. Many of them have maintained their power over the years by appealing to religious and ethnic identities. We're going to talk more about that in a little bit, but that connects to the idea of prebendelism, which is patron clientism through support of your similar ethnic group. And separatist movements have emerged from these social cleavages. If you guys need to name a few: Boko Haram in the north is a big one, protests for the Ogoni land in the south, and Mend also in the south. Okay, prebendelism. This is a personalized system of rule where public offices and state income are dispersed to different ethnic clientele. Basically, it's patron clientism, except you don't just support who you know, you support who you know and is of similar ethnic group. Personal offices in the bureaucracies are often treated like fiefdoms. That term originates with the word fief. Fief is a term from Middle Ages, from Europe during the Middle Ages. This idea that like kings had big kingdoms, but they would give a chunk of land to a noble, and the noble would run that chunk of land and the villagers in the chunk of land as a fief. So it's like their little tiny kingdom or fiefdom. And these large patronage networks from prebendelism are based on personal loyalty and ethnic group. Local government officials have gained village support by dispensing favors throughout the villages and localities in Nigeria. They receive favors back for supporting patron bosses, and again, the support system is based on ethnicity. Most favors are exchanged by the political elites at the top, very few sort of trickle down. And then this, of course, allows for the creation of a lot of corruption, informal political influence. Both of these are rampant throughout Nigeria. You add to that the rentier state, and it really does allow for an extreme amount of corruption to sort of swallow up the Nigerian economy. Prebendalism represents an established form of political participation in Nigeria as well. So this was a Gallup poll taken from 2006 to 2011. Question it's asking, is corruption widespread throughout the government in Nigeria or not? You guys can see on the graph, the opinion of Nigerians is that yes, corruption is widespread. Numbers fluctuate from about 85% to the highest is at 94%, but the vast majority of Nigerians do believe that corruption is widespread throughout the country. All right, let's talk about oil. Nigeria is what we would consider a rentier state. What are the other rentier states we've talked about in COPO? Iran and Russia. Both of those today are considered technically to be rentier states. So what's the definition to remind ourselves? Definition of a rentier state is to obtain a sizable percentage of total government revenue from the export of oil and gas or from the leasing of the resource to foreign countries. Rentier states have been able to raise their standards of living and fund government programs based on their huge oil reserves. In Nigeria, the oil is predominantly located in the Niger Delta. Companies like Royal Dutch Shell, Exxon Mobil come in, they rent or lease the land, they draw oil from the land to export, and then they give back to the state cash in the form of their rent or their lease. So Nigeria, because of its abundance of natural resources, most economists and political scientists alike would say that Nigeria has been touched by what we call the resource curse. This is often called the paradox of plenty. The resource curse is the idea that, yes, you have an abundance of resources, but at the end of the day, it actually hurts you more than it helps you. And here's what we mean by that. What are the outcomes of both the rentier state and the resource curse? You end up seeing a lack of economic diversification, meaning because the state relies so heavily upon the export of oil, the state is not going to invest in development of other key industries. So the concentration of governmental resources is on developing the one profitable export industry they have, which is oil, instead of other types of industries. The severe revenue fluctuations are going to crush the Nigerian market. And what we mean by that is that oil is not a stable commodity. When you guys go to the gas station right now in April of 2020, you know exactly what we mean. Gasoline is down at, $1.50 a gallon, which we haven't seen in this country since the very early 2000s. Nigeria is part of OPEC, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. They're part of that supranational organization to try to maintain the price of oil, but oil is unstable. It's a global commodity. To depend your entire economy on the sale of oil, it makes it very dangerous. Let me see, the overvaluation of currency and trade imbalances is going to hurt these oil-rich countries. The increasing disparity between the rich and the poor, which we're going to see in Nigeria. A lack of incentive to modernize the economy or cooperate with international judicial bodies. Increased governmental corruption. You guys saw a lot of those in those oil videos. And then a lack of government accountability to citizens when not relying on citizens as sources of revenue. We've discussed this in my class in particular, the idea that when I get upset about a road, or I get upset about a law, or my taxes, or the schools, I can call up my school board, my representatives, my senators, and I say, you have to listen to me because I am a taxpayer. In Nigeria and in other rentier states, it's not necessarily the case. When the state is making the majority of their revenue off of the export and sale of oil, they're not going to listen to their citizens. Their citizens' opinion is not valid because they're not a taxpayer. All right, let's talk about economic issues. So the NNPC, this is Nigeria's state-owned petroleum corporation, Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation. They're going to collaborate with foreign companies, multinational corporations. I mentioned a couple already, ExxonMobil, Royal Dutch Shell. These are joint ventures to extract and produce oil. So foreign multinational corporations are going to underwrite Nigeria's oil production and exercise some political control over the national government. You guys have to remember, the oil that we're talking about, this is crude oil. This is crude oil coming straight from the ground. It is black, it is tar, it is unrefined. So Nigeria needs these foreign companies in order to take this raw product and turn it into something they're able to sell on the market. You guys saw that in that Vice video where Nigerian oil pirates are stealing into the pipelines. They're going into the jungle and they're refining the oil themselves. So the two big supranational organizations for the economy that you guys need to know, OPEC, which we already talked about, and ECOWAS, which is in your guided reading. And then as conflicts in the Middle East continue, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Yemen, Nigeria has become a very important trading partner because they're not necessarily involved in many of these violent political conflicts. Okay, this is where we're going to pause for right now. We'll pick up with the next slide, structural adjustment, in the next video.